Dr. Jayraj's Literary Lens presents Part 2, Lecture 13, Post-Discourse Theory. This lecture is prepared and presented by Dr. S. Joseph Arul Jayraj, former Head and Associate Professor of English, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, India. A note of caution. A lecture should not be viewed as a finished monument of closed information, but rather as a catalyst for intellectual discovery rooted in productive incompleteness. Instead of seeking purely polished, airtight presentations, listeners should value the uncertainties and unanswered questions that spark further research. By embracing these frayed ends, rather than treating knowledge as a static product, the audience is invited to transform from passive recipients into active architects of new ideas, allowing the lecture to serve as a starting point for their ongoing inquiry. Introduction. Have you ever thought about how the words people use shape the way we see the world? For example, when politicians talk about freedom or safety, their words do not just describe things, they can change how we think and feel. This idea is at the heart of discourse theory, which studies how language creates meaning in society. Post-discourse theory takes this further. It says that language does not just reflect reality, it helps make reality. But more than that, post-discourse theory explores how power, truth, and knowledge mix in complex ways, especially in the digital and global age. It is not a single, fixed theory, but a set of ideas developed by scholars who want to understand how communication works today. This talk explains post-discourse theory in simple terms. It begins with a background on discourse theory, explains how post-discourse theory developed, and discusses its main ideas. It then shows how the theory applies in real life and draws a conclusion. Post-discourse theory. Here, a term inspired by Michel Foucault's discourse theory, explores how systems of language, power, and knowledge shape human understanding. In literature, this theory reveals how authors deconstruct dominant narratives and highlight how language constructs reality. This talk examines how post-discourse theory is implemented in literature through the deconstruction of power structures, the creation of alternative discourses, and the critique of language's role in shaping societal norms. Theory 1. Background. What is discourse theory? To understand post-discourse theory, we first need to understand discourse theory. Discourse theory comes from the work of French philosopher Michel Foucault. He argued that discourse is more than just conversation or writing. For Foucault, discourse is a system of thoughts, ideas, and language that shapes what we believe is true or normal. For example, in mental health, the way doctors talk about depression is a discourse. That discourse affects how people understand mental illness. It can decide who is seen as sick and who is not. Discourse is not neutral. It is tied to power. Whoever controls the dominant discourse often controls what counts as knowledge. Later thinkers, like Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, used discourse theory in politics. They said that political ideas, like democracy or justice, are not fixed. They gain meaning through discourse. What freedom means can change depending on who is speaking and in what situation. 2. What is post-discourse theory? Post-discourse theory is not one complete theory, but a group of ideas that question and extend traditional discourse theory. It emerged in the 2000s as scholars tried to explain changes in language and society brought by globalization, digital media, and new forms of identity. The prefix post means after, so post-discourse theory is not against discourse theory, it builds on it. But it also says that older ideas need updating. The world has changed. Today, people communicate through social media, memes, videos, and emojis. Power is no longer just held by governments or experts, it is spread across many voices online. Truth itself is often debated and unstable. 2.1. Post-Discourse Theory asks, how do messages spread so quickly online? Who gets to speak and who is ignored? How do language and images work together in digital spaces? Can there be truth when so many voices claim to be right? It focuses less on fixed systems of discourse and more on movement, change, and emotion. Unlike earlier theories that looked at formal speeches or policy texts, post-discourse theory studies tweets, TikTok videos, and online debates. One key idea is that meaning today is not just created through words, but through feelings, images, and actions. This is called affective discourse. For example, a viral photo of a child refugee might move people more than a long article on immigration policy. 3. Main ideas in post-discourse theory. Here are some of the main ideas in post-discourse theory. 3.1. Language is not the only thing that matters. While discourse theory focused on language, post-discourse theory includes images, sounds, gestures, and algorithms. A meme, for instance, uses a picture and a few words to make a point. Its power lies in how fast it spreads and how people react emotionally. 3.2. Power is everywhere, not just at the top. Older theories saw power as coming from institutions like the government or the media. Post-discourse theory says power is more fluid. A teenager with a TikTok account can influence millions. But power can also silence people. Algorithms might hide certain voices. 3.3. Truth is contestable. Post-discourse theory agrees with Foucault that truth is made by discourse. But today, truth is more unstable. Fake news, conspiracy theories, and deep fakes make it hard to know what is real. Post-discourse scholars study how people argue over truth and how some voices are seen as more believable than others. 3.4. Emotion matters as much as reason. People do not just think rationally, they feel. Anger, hope, fear, and humor shape what people believe and share. A political message that makes people angry may spread faster than a calm, logical one. Post-discourse theory pays attention to these emotions. 3.5. There are no fixed identities. In traditional discourse, people were seen as having stable identities, like teacher or citizen. Post-discourse theory says identities are always changing. On social media, people can act differently depending on the platform. Serious on LinkedIn, funny on Twitter, private on Instagram. Identities perform rather than exist. 4. Real-life examples of post-discourse theory. Let's look at 2 real examples to see post-discourse theory in action. 4.1. The hashtag #MeToo movement. The hashtag #MeToo movement began as a hashtag on social media. It spread fast because it combined words, personal stories, and strong emotions like anger and solidarity. Traditional media helped, but the movement grew through everyday people sharing experiences. Post-discourse theory helps us see how power shifted. Victims who were once silenced now had a platform. Truth was not decided by courts or newspapers, but by public support online. The discourse was not controlled by one group, but shaped by many voices. Emotion played a big role in making the movement powerful. On social media, people can act differently depending on the platform. Serious on LinkedIn, funny on Twitter, private on Instagram. Identities perform rather than exist. 4. Real-life examples of post-discourse theory. Let's look at 2 real examples to see post-discourse theory in action. 4.1. The hashtag #MeToo movement. The hashtag #MeToo movement began as a hashtag on social media. It spread fast because it combined words, personal stories, and strong emotions like anger and solidarity. Traditional media helped, but the movement grew through everyday people sharing experiences. Post-discourse theory helps us see how power shifted. Victims who were once silenced now had a platform. Truth was not decided by courts or newspapers, but by public support online. The discourse was not controlled by one group, but shaped by many voices. Emotion played a big role in making the movement powerful. 4.2. Political Meme Wars. In elections, memes have become tools for political messaging. A funny image with a short text can criticize a leader or promote a party. These memes spread quickly and often use irony or exaggeration. Post-Discourse Theory explains that memes are not just jokes. They shape how people think about politics. They use emotion, laughter, anger, and combine image and text. The power is not with one author, but with the crowd that shares and changes the meme. 5. Criticisms of post-discourse theory. No theory is perfect. Some scholars say post-discourse theory is too vague because it includes so many things, images, emotions, algorithms. It can be hard to test or use in research. Others worry that it gives too much power to feelings and not enough to facts. If everything is about emotion and interpretation, how can we agree on truth? This could lead to relativism, the idea that no view is truer than another. Also, some say post-discourse theory ignores material reality. People still suffer from poverty, war, or illness, no matter what discourse says. Language shapes reality, but it does not replace it. Practice 6. How is post-discourse theory embedded in literature? 6.1. Deconstructing dominant narratives. Post-discourse theory encourages literary works to question established truths by exposing how dominant narratives marginalize certain voices. For example, in Beloved, by Toni Morrison, the fragmented storytelling deconstructs the dominant white discourse on slavery. Morrison's use of nonlinear timelines and supernatural elements challenges the erasure of African American trauma from historical records. By centering the silenced experiences of Black characters, the novel illustrates how discourses, like slavery, are not just historical facts, but systems of power that shape collective memory. Similarly, George Orwell's 1984 portrays a dystopian state where newspeak is designed to eliminate rebellious thoughts. The erasure of language from double plus good to good plus good shows how controlling discourse can control reality. As Foucault argues, power operates through language to define what is thinkable. Orwell's novel demonstrates how post-discourse theory can be used to critique totalitarian regimes that weaponize language to suppress dissent. 6.2. Creating alternative discourses. Post-discourse theory also empowers authors to construct counter-discourses that challenge oppressive ideologies. In The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, the protagonist Offred's secret recordings become an act of resistance. By preserving her narrative outside the state's surveillance, she creates an alternative discourse to Gilead's patriarchal ideology. This mirrors Foucault's idea that marginalized groups can subvert dominant discourses by asserting their own, Foucault 145. Atwood's novel thus critiques how patriarchal regimes rely on controlling women's bodies and their voices. Toni Morrison's Beloved further exemplifies this through its multivocal narrative. The novel includes the perspectives of enslaved people, free Black characters, and even a ghost, creating a discourse where multiple truths coexist. This challenges the monolithic narrative of American history and asserts the agency of African Americans in shaping their own stories. Morrison 120. 6.3. Language and power in literature. Post-discourse theory underscores how language is not neutral but a tool of power. In 1984, the manipulation of words like "freedom is slavery" demonstrates how language can distort reality to maintain control. Orwell 75. This aligns with Foucault's assertion that discourse is a form of power that is never entirely at the disposal of the subject who wields it. Orwell's portrayal warns of how discourses, once internalized, can suppress individual thought. Similarly, in The Handmaid's Tale, the state enforces a religious lexicon to justify its regime. Phrases like "under his eye" erase the handmaid's autonomy, reducing them to objects of divine ownership. Atwood's use of this language highlights how discourses can weaponize religion to legitimize oppression. Conclusion. Post-discourse theory is a valuable way to understand how communication works in today's world. It builds on the ideas of Foucault and others, but updates them for the digital age. It shows that language, images, emotions, and technology all help create meaning and power. For readers and researchers, post-discourse theory can be a useful tool to analyze media, politics, and everyday conversations. It teaches us to ask, who is speaking, what emotions are being used, how is power working, and who is left out. While the theory has limits, it offers a deeper way to see how words and images shape our lives. As communication keeps changing, post-discourse theory is likely to keep evolving too. Post-discourse theory in literature serves as both a critique and a tool for resistance. By deconstructing dominant narratives, creating counter-discourses, and analyzing language's role in power, authors like Morrison, Orwell, and Atwood reveal how discourses shape and can be reshaped to challenge societal hierarchies. Understanding these dynamics empowers readers to question what is considered truth and recognize the transformative potential of literature. Thank you.